My name is Evelyn Monroe, and I was 33 the day my parents came to my wedding dressed for a funeral. Black dress, black veil, my father in a black suit that still had the store crease in the sleeve. My sister Bryn walked between them with a folder under her arm and a smile she'd been saving all week. The music stopped. 150 guests turned in their chairs. My mother crossed the barn floor, took the microphone off its stand, and said in a voice built for a church, "We can only mourn one daughter today." Then she looked at me in my white dress and said, "We'll stay right here until you sign this house over to your sister." Bryn laughed. My husband set down his glass and stood up. What he put on that screen a minute later is the part none of them saw coming. To understand why my own mother wore black to my wedding, you have to go back to a green metal box under my grandmother's stairs. I'm an emergency room nurse, 12 years of night shifts in a county hospital, the kind of work that teaches you to trust your own eyes and nobody's story. When a chart says one thing and a patient's color says another, you learn to believe the color. I catch the small wrong thing before it turns into the big wrong thing. That's the whole job. I was good at it. I just never thought I'd have to do it to my own family. People who meet me say I'm calm. What they mean is I'm quiet. And quiet gets mistaken for a lot of things. In my family, it got mistaken for a door. I lived alone back then, out on Larkin Road, in a farmhouse with cedar closets and a porch that needed paint. I paid for that paint myself, 1 gallon at a time, the same way I'd paid for nursing school and the used truck in the driveway. Nobody handed me anything. I want you to understand that early, because later somebody is going to stand up and tell a whole room that I owed them everything. I didn't. I owed them exactly nothing. And it took me 33 years and a forged signature to finally say so out loud. The house on Larkin Road was my grandmother's before it was mine. Ruth Monroe raised me in that house more than my own parents ever did. When I was small and the noise at home got to be too much, my father would drive me out to the farm and leave me for a weekend that stretched into a week. Grandma Ruth never once acted like I was a burden dropped on her porch. She taught me to can tomatoes and change a tire and write everything down. "Paper doesn't forget, Willa," she'd say, tapping the old ledger where she tracked every seed and every dollar. "People forget, paper doesn't." She kept a green metal box under the stairs that she called her important things box, and she guarded it like it held gold. It held paper. That's all it ever held. By the end of this story, you'll understand that paper was worth more than gold. Grandma died 2 years before my wedding, 81 years old, in her own bed, with me holding her hand through a night shift I'd traded 3 favors to get off. In her will, she left the farmhouse to me, not to the family, not to be split. To me, by name, spelled out by her lawyer and recorded down at the county building where such things get made real. My parents were at the reading. I watched my mother's face when the lawyer said my name, and only my name. She smiled the way you smile at a funeral when you're already thinking about the estate. I didn't understand that smile then. 2 years later, it would fit. 2 years later, that smile would walk into my wedding wearing a black veil. I unfolded her letter and heard her voice in every line. She'd written it the last spring she was alive, though she never gave it to me. She wrote that she knew exactly what my parents were, that she'd watched them dote on Bryn and lean on me my whole life, and that it had broken something in her she never let me see. Asterisk, I didn't leave you this farm because you needed a house, asterisk, she wrote. Asterisk, I left it to you because you needed proof. Proof that somebody chose you first, on purpose, in writing, where no one could argue it away later. Asterisk. And near the bottom, underlined once. Asterisk, this house already knows who it belongs to. Don't let anyone move you from it. Asterisk. She'd known. 2 years before a title company ever mailed me a warning, my grandmother had known someone would come for this farm, and she'd left me the words to stand on while I fought for it. The next morning I showed Elliot everything. He read it all quietly, and when he got to the line about the house knowing who it belonged to, he sat with it for a while. Then he did the thing I love him for. He didn't get angry on my behalf. He got practical. They don't do quiet, he said. They do audiences. Every time they've wanted something from you, they've done it in front of people, so the pressure is on you to keep the peace. The biggest audience I had coming was my wedding. If they're going to make a scene, they'll make it where it costs you the most to say no. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen and I built the paper trail. The forged quitclaim had been recorded 3 weeks before that certified letter ever reached my mailbox. Whoever filed it had moved fast, betting I wouldn't look until it was too late. The notary, a woman named Alderman, had acknowledged a signature presented to her by a woman claiming to sign on behalf of her sister, who couldn't make it. Brown hair to the shoulders, confident, a little impatient, a young daughter colouring in a chair by the door. Piper. My stomach turned at the thought of my niece sitting in a notary's office while her mother forged my name 3 feet away. 2 days later, without meaning to look for anything, I found the proof that my mother wasn't just aware, she was driving it. Bryn dropped Piper at the farm for a few hours. I handed her the tablet to get her cartoons going, and it woke to a messaging thread Bryn had left open. I did not scroll. But the message already on the screen put itself in front of my eyes. Asterisk, the wedding's our last shot. Once she signs in front of everyone, she can't back out. Mom, you have to sell it before the bank comes. Asterisk. I got Piper's cartoon going, stepped into the next room, and called Karen. She told me to leave it entirely alone. Our case lived and died on the county records, not on a message I had no right to have seen. She was right. But 2 words wouldn't leave me. Asterisk before the bank comes. Asterisk, there was a bank in this. A clock I hadn't seen yet, and it wasn't ticking against me. Karen advised patience, the hardest advice I've ever taken. Let the filing mature, keep every fact documented, don't tip my hand. If I confronted them now, they'd scatter and lawyer up. If I stayed quiet, they'd walk straight into whatever room they'd chosen and expose themselves in front of the exact witnesses I'd need. So I smiled at my mother's calls. I answered Bryn's jabs with mild nothing. I let them keep believing I was soft, busy, and easy to run down. 3 deadlines were closing on the same point. My wedding, 16 days out, Karen's filing to void the forged deed, which she wanted in front of the county before month's end, and whatever was happening with that bank. My mother's calls got more frequent and syrupy. She wanted us to be a united family for the wedding. 4 days out, she left a voicemail I still have. We'll all be there on your day, honey. The whole family. Wear something nice. We're going to settle this once and for all. They'd chosen the room. I called Elliot and played him the message. Okay, he said. Let's make sure the screen's ready. To understand my family, you have to understand the math of it, and the math never changed. There were 2 daughters. There was one bank of attention, and it all flowed one direction. Bryn was 3 years younger and, in my parents' eyes, 3 years more fragile. When Bryn wanted dance lessons, there was money for dance lessons. When I wanted the same, I was told I was practical, that I didn't need things like that. Asterisk practical. Asterisk, that word followed me my whole life like a dog I never fed. It meant, you'll be fine, so we won't worry about you. By the time we were grown, the pattern had a rhythm you could set a clock to. Bryn opened a boutique in town with money my parents scraped together. It failed. She opened another. That failed too. Each time, my mother's voice on the phone would go soft and urgent, and the family would rally around Bryn like she was a house on fire. Nobody ever rallied around me, because I never let anything catch fire. I paid my bills. I showed up for my shifts. I was reliable. And in my family, reliable was just a quieter word for available to be leaned on, borrowed from, and eventually, robbed. I didn't resent Bryn, not really. You can't resent water for running downhill. I resented that nobody ever asked if I was tired of being the hill. I met Elliot Brandt at a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department. He taught history at the high school 2 towns over, and he had the calmest hands I'd ever seen on a man who wasn't a surgeon. We dated for 2 years before he asked, and when he asked, he did it on the porch on Larkin Road, with the paint I'd finally finished drying behind us. I said yes before he got the whole sentence out. I called my parents the next morning, because I still played by rules nobody else in my family respected. My mother went quiet on the line, not happy quiet, calculating quiet. Then she said, "That's nice, honey. And what happens to the house?" Not congratulations. Not I'm happy for you. The house. I told her the house was mine and would stay mine, and Elliot understood that. "We'll see," she said, in the tone she used when she meant the opposite. Then I heard her call out to my father, and I heard Bryn's name, and I heard a door close. The line came back a minute later, bright and false. "We'll celebrate soon," she said, and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table with the ring still new on my hand and a cold feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with Elliot. I knew that closed-door tone. I'd heard it my whole childhood, always right before something got decided about me without me. The first ask came 2 weeks later, over coffee at my mother's kitchen table. She poured the good coffee, the kind she saved for company, which should have been my first warning. Then she told me the family had been talking. In my family, the family has been talking means a decision has already been made and I'm being informed. Bryn was going through a hard stretch, she said. It wasn't fair that I had a whole house to myself while my sister struggled. It would mean so much if you'd think about sharing the farm with your sister. Putting her name on it. For family. I set my cup down. I said no, kindly but clearly. My mother's face changed like weather. "After everything this family has done for you," she said, dabbing at nothing. I asked her, honestly curious, what exactly the family had done for me that I hadn't done for myself. She didn't answer that. Instead she said the thing that stayed with me the whole way home: "You owe this family more than you think, Willa. Not more than you know, more than you think." Like there was a number I hadn't been shown yet.
Bryn called a few days later, sugar first. She was thrilled about the wedding, Elliot seemed nice. And then, sideways as always, wasn't the farm really the family's place, since Grandma had lived there? Wouldn't it be lovely if it stayed in the family properly? I told her it was in the family. It was mine, and I was family. She laughed her light little laugh, the one that means she's decided you're being difficult, and said, "Don't worry about it, Willie. It's all going to get sorted out soon." Piper, my 6-year-old niece, got on the phone that same call and told me she'd drawn me a picture of the farm, crooked windows and a giant yellow sun, "So you can find your way home, Aunt Willa." I nearly cried at the sink. Then Bryn took the phone back, all the sugar gone. "Anyway, talk soon." My sister always smiled widest right before she took something. That call sent me down a hallway of memory I usually keep the door shut on. I was 9 years old, the night before Bryn's dance recital, and I'd come downstairs for water and stopped in the dark of the hall because my mother was on the phone with my aunt, in the low honest tone she only used when she thought no one could hear. She was talking about me, said I was a strange child, too serious, too much like Grandma Ruth. Then, sometimes I look at her and I swear she was never really one of us. I was 9. I didn't have words for what it did to me. I just went back upstairs without my water and understood, in the wordless way children understand things, that I had been weighed and found separate. I never told anyone. I built my whole life around being useful enough that maybe someday I'd be counted in. I became the nurse, the reliable one, the one who never caught fire. Some starved little part of me kept waiting for my mother to take it back. She never did. Standing in my kitchen at 33, I finally let myself know that she never would. The wedding gave me plenty to watch. Elliot and I were paying for most of it ourselves at the Hartley barn. Modest, ours. My mother called to say it was a shame to waste money on a party when Bryn was drowning. Bryn offered to help plan and used every conversation to circle back to the farm. Elliot never once mentioned the house except to say it was mine and he was glad I had it. That's how I knew. In my family, love came with an invoice. Elliot's didn't. 2 days later, a stiff envelope arrived by certified mail, a title insurance company. As part of a routine records review, they wrote, they had identified a recently recorded document affecting the property at my address, and they were writing to confirm whether the transaction was authorized by all parties of record. No explanation of what the document actually was. I had not signed anything. I had not sold, refinanced, gifted, or altered 1 square inch of that farm. My grandmother's voice came back to me. Asterisk paper doesn't forget. Asterisk someone had put paper into the world with my house's name on it, and I hadn't held the pen. I called the title company the next morning. They could confirm the document existed but couldn't interpret it. The fastest way to see it myself was the county recorder's office, 40 minutes east. Public records. Anyone could request a certified copy. Certified copies took a few business days. With 3 night shifts back to back, the soonest I could get there was 5 days out. I gave the clerk my name and parcel number and asked her to start preparing copies anyway.
That Sunday my mother summoned me to dinner. My father barely spoke to me all night. Piper climbed into my lap and told me about a caterpillar she'd named Gerald, after my father, which almost made even him smile. Then the plates were cleared and my mother said the family had been thinking about the future, about security. Wasn't it time we all sat down with a lawyer and got the farm handled properly? I said the farm was handled. Grandma's will had handled it 2 years ago. Bryn, who'd been quiet, leaned in and said, too casually, "So you haven't signed anything yet?" The table went still for one breath. My mother shot her a look. Bryn laughed it off. "Just meant, with the wedding, there's so much paperwork." But I'd heard it, signed anything yet as if signing were expected, as if a document were already out there in the world waiting for my name to make it complete. 5 days later, on a grey Tuesday morning after a brutal night shift, I drove to the county recorder's office instead of going home to sleep. Under the fluorescent lights, still in my scrubs, I opened the folder. On top, the certified copy of my grandmother's deed, clean and correct, the farmhouse recorded to me alone. Underneath, a second document, recently recorded, a quitclaim deed. And on it, transferring an interest in my property, was a signature. My signature. Willa Monroe, in a looping hand that leaned the way mine leans, close enough to fool a stranger, wrong enough to stop my breath. I had never seen this document before in my life. I had never signed it. Below my forged name, added as a new owner of the farm my grandmother left to me alone, was a name I knew as well as my own, Bryn Monroe. My sister had put her name on my house and forged mine to do it. I asked the clerk for certified copies of both documents, the exact recording date, and the name of the notary who'd stamped it. I did not drive to my mother's house and scream. That's what they would have expected, and a person who reacts is a person you can manage. I drove home, slept 4 hours, and called a lawyer. Karen Vosberg had handled real estate in that county for 20 years. I laid the 2 deeds out on my kitchen table and read her everything, slow and exact. "Willa," she said, "a forged signature on a deed isn't a family argument. It's forgery. It's a crime." The quitclaim was almost certainly void. You can't transfer away someone's property with a signature they never wrote, but void wasn't automatic. A forged document, once recorded, sits on the public record looking exactly like a real one until a court is asked to strike it. We'd need to file, prove the forgery, and let the county records back the story. "Do not confront them," she said. "People who forge documents get desperate when they're cornered, and desperate people do bigger, dumber things." While she was still talking, my phone buzzed with my mother's name, 3 times in a row. I let it ring. For the first time in my life, I let my mother's call go, and I felt the ground shift under me, because I finally understood, I was the one holding the pen. That night I finally pulled out Grandma Ruth's green metal box from under the stairs, where it had sat untouched since the funeral. Inside, the smell of cedar and old paper rose up like she'd just closed it yesterday. On top, folded once, was a piece of stationery in her round, deliberate hand. Underneath, in a manila sleeve labeled in block letters, was a copy of the deed to the farm, the original recording, the real one. 2 days before the wedding, Karen called with the piece that explained everything. She'd been pulling the recorded documents around my parents' house in town, and the story was all there in liens and filings. Years ago, my parents had opened a home equity line of credit against their own house, a big one, and over 3 years had drained it nearly dry. $180,000, pulled out in chunks that lined up almost to the week with each of Bryn's failed boutiques and bailouts. The line was maxed, payments were behind, and there were default notices in the record. That was the bank. That was the clock. My parents were about to lose their own house because they'd spent it all on the daughter they favored. And the only unencumbered, clean, paid-off asset left standing in the family was the farmhouse on Larkin Road, the one an old woman had deliberately left to the other daughter. They didn't want my house because they were cruel. Or not only that. They wanted it because it was the last dry ground in a flood they'd made themselves. I felt something close to pity for about a minute. Then I remembered a forged signature and a 9-year-old in a dark hallway, and the pity folded itself small and got out of the way. Once I understood the money, the rest of the plan unfolded like a diagram. The forged deed was shaky, a forged signature could be challenged and collapse the whole thing, and Bryn could face real trouble. What they needed was for me to sign a real one, freely given, in public, wrapped in grief and shame, so refusing would feel like cruelty performed in front of everyone I knew. That was the black clothing. That was the funeral costume. My mother wasn't mourning a death. She was staging one, casting me as the daughter who'd killed the family by refusing to help, so a barn full of my friends and neighbors would silently beg me to just sign it and make the sad woman stop. 2 years earlier, maybe even 2 months earlier, it might have worked. They had no way of knowing I'd spent the last month reading my grandmother's ledger and her letter, and learning that being chosen once, on purpose, in writing, was worth more than a lifetime of their approval. The day before the wedding, Elliot and I went to the Hartley barn to help set up. While the florist fussed with mason jars, the barn owner showed us how the slideshow ran: a laptop wired to a projector and a big pull-down screen, a remote to advance slides. Our real slideshow was already loaded: Elliot and me at the lake, the porch, Piper's crayon drawing of the farm with its giant yellow sun. In a second folder, we loaded another set of slides, not out of cruelty, as insurance, the way I keep a crash cart stocked. Pray you never need it, be ready if you do. Slide 1. My grandmother's real recorded deed, the farm to me alone. Slide 2. The forged quitclaim, my faked signature beside Bryn's real name, the notary's log, the fraud reference number. Slide 3. The public record of the home equity line, the withdrawals, the default notices, the plain arithmetic of where the money went. We agreed on one rule and said it aloud so neither of us could pretend later. The truth file stayed dark unless they forced it into the light. If they behaved like people, it would never run. If they stood up and tried to take my home by shame, Elliot would advance one slide, and the room would see what I'd been carrying alone. That night my father called, a rare thing. "You don't have to come tomorrow if you don't want to," he said, in his clumsy way trying to warn me off. For one aching moment I saw the man who used to drive me to the farm when the house got loud. I asked him gently if he knew what Mom was planning. The line went quiet, and then he said the thing that told me exactly where he stood: "Just listen to your mother, Willa. She knows what's best for this family." He knew. All of it. And his idea of protecting me was to tell me to stay home so I wouldn't be there to say no. "I'll be there, Dad," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." I hung up before he could hear that I meant it as a promise, not a comfort. Getting ready that morning, I realized my family had made one enormous miscalculation. They'd chosen my wedding as their stage, thinking the audience would pressure me. They never stopped to think about who the audience actually was. Half my co-workers were out there. My neighbors from Larkin Road, who'd watched me paint that porch myself. My maid of honor's husband, a sheriff's deputy in that very county. My parents' own pastor, invited by them, who'd baptized Bryn and buried my grandmother. The coordinator knocked to say there'd been 2 late additions to the seating. My parents, RSVP'd no, were here. I nodded. Seat them wherever they like. They'll move anyway. I took my grandmother's letter out one last time and read the line I already knew by heart. Asterisk, this house already knows who it belongs to. Asterisk, I made myself a set of promises. I would not grab the microphone back and shout. I would not sink to my mother's theatre. I would let her finish, let the whole barn see exactly what she'd come to do, in her own words, in her funeral black. And then, only then, I would nod to my husband, and the truth I'd carried alone would stop being mine to carry alone. The ceremony itself was beautiful, and I'm keeping that part for myself. We said our vows and meant them. For 11 minutes I forgot there was a folder. Then it was done, and we walked into the reception, and the temperature of the room changed. A ripple near the 3rd row. Chairs scraping. My mother in unrelieved black, veil down, my father behind her in his stiff suit, Bryn between them, chin up, folder under her arm, pen already in her hand. My mother reached the front and picked up the microphone. She lifted her veil just enough to be seen, let the silence stretch, and told my guests this was the hardest day of her life, that she'd raised 2 daughters to love each other and one had turned her back on the family when it needed her most. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Then she delivered the line she'd worn black to say, "We can only mourn one daughter today." The barn went silent. "We'll stay right here," she said, "until you sign this house over to your sister." Bryn stepped forward with the folder open and the pen held out, and she laughed, bright, delighted, certain I would walk over and sign. I did not move toward the pen. Elliot set down his glass and stood, unhurried, the calmest man in a barn full of frightened people. He looked at me and asked quietly, "Evie, is it all right if I show them?" "Yes," I said, softly. "I think everyone should see the rest of it." I turned to my mother. "You can put that down now, Mom." You came here to bury me in front of my friends. The least I can do is let them come to the whole funeral." Her performance flickered, and underneath it, for the first time, I saw fear. Elliot advanced the first slide. My grandmother's real deed, county-stamped, plain and inarguable. The barn read it, and understood, there was nothing to share. My mother's voice sharpened, losing its churchly command. A neighbor from Larkin Road said, quietly, "That's Ruth's writing on the will right there." The second slide, the forged quitclaim, my counterfeit signature enlarged 10 feet tall beside Bryn's real name, the notary's log, the reference number, and one line I'd added myself, *, this signature is a forgery. I never *, this document. *, the barn made a sound like a collective intake of breath. Every eye turned to Bryn. I didn't, that's a mistake, she stammered, and it was the worst possible thing to say, because it wasn't a denial, it was a fumble. At table 4, the sheriff's deputy stood up, unhurried, and looked at the screen, then at Bryn, with the flat attention of a man who has recognized a crime. The pen fell from Bryn's hand and clattered on the floor. My mother reached for the microphone one more time. "This is a private family matter. Turn that off." I looked at Elliot. "Show them the rest." The third slide, the home equity line, the $180,000 drawn down piece by piece, the default notices, a family that had bankrupted itself in secret and dressed up a robbery as a funeral. And at the bottom, one more thing, the message from Bryn's tablet, my mother's own words in her own hand. * she was never really one of us. Once she signs, we let the bank take Ruth's house and split the cash. *. The barn went silent in a way that had weight to it. A small hand slipped into mine. Piper, 6 years old, frightened. I knelt down, put my hand gently over her eyes, and said, "Not for you, sweetheart. This part isn't for you," and walked her over to my maid of honor. When I stood back up, I wasn't afraid of my mother's face anymore. I took out my grandmother's letter and read one line aloud, slow and clear. * this house already knows who it belongs to. * Then I looked at my sister, my father, and last my mother. "You didn't come here to mourn me. You came to rob me in front of everyone I love, because you thought a crowd would make me too ashamed to say no. But I'm not the one who should be ashamed today. You forged my name on my grandmother's house. You drained your own home dry for the daughter you chose. And you put on black and called it grief so 150 people would help you take the last thing I had left of the only person who ever chose me. It's all on the county record now. And now it's in front of every witness you brought yourselves." My mother exploded the way cornered people always do, loud, ugly, and convincing no one. My father took her elbow and steered her toward the door, muttering about lawyers. Bryn snatched her folder off the floor and then simply ran, out through the string lights and into the gravel lot. My mother went after her, my father after both of them. 3 figures in funeral black, fleeing a wedding they'd come to turn into a grave. Gravel spat under tires. They were gone. The pen stayed on the floor, and the unsigned pages fluttered after them. Elliot touched the laptop, and the forged deed and my mother's words vanished, replaced by our real slideshow, the lake, the porch, Piper's grandson. The pastor walked to the front and said simply, "Well, I think we all know now who that young woman is, and who raised her." He smiled at us. "Shall we get on with celebrating a marriage?" The barn exhaled, and began, unbelievably, to laugh, and then to clap. My maid of honor brought Piper back in from the sunshine, and the little girl ran to me, pointed at her drawing glowing on the big screen, and shouted, "That's my son, Aunt Willa. That's my son." I held my niece and my husband's hand at the front of a barn strung with lights, and for the first time in my life I stood in a room full of family where not one person wanted anything from me except to see me happy. Karen filed the following week, and the forged quitclaim was struck from the record, void, as if it had never dared to exist. The county forwarded the forgery to the district attorney, and Bryn spent the following months learning what a signature costs when it isn't yours to write. My parents' house went the way it was always going to go once they'd emptied it through that home equity line, foreclosure, taken by the bank they'd been racing all along. I take no credit and no pleasure in that part. They dug that hole themselves. My mother never called to apologize, only one voicemail, weeks later, still casting herself as the victim, still talking about family and loyalty and what I owed. I didn't call back. I saved it, the way I save everything now. Paper doesn't forget. Neither, it turns out, do I. The farm on Larkin Road stayed mine, clean, titled, unarguable. Elliot moved his books into the room with the best morning light, and we repainted the porch together that spring, 2 gallons at a time. Some nights I still take my grandmother's green metal box down from under the stairs, not because I need anything in it, but just to sit with her letter for a minute. Asterisk this house already knows who it belongs to. Asterisk it always did. It just took the rest of us a while to catch up. Piper was the one person in that family I refused to lose. None of it was ever hers. She was 6 years old, coloring a son in a notary's waiting room while the adults around her committed a crime she'll only understand when she's grown. So I did the one thing my own mother never managed for me. I made sure a child knew, plainly and often, that she was wanted for nothing but herself. She started spending Saturdays at the farm. We feed the chickens, bake bad cookies, and sit on the repainted porch. Once she asked me, in the blunt way of children, if she'd done something wrong. I knelt down and told her the truth a child can hold: you never owe anybody your love as payment. Not them, not even me. You get to give it because you want to. That's the only way it counts. Being the strong one in my family was never a debt I owed them my roof to repay. It was the steadiness I was quietly building all along, so that on the day they finally came for everything, I'd have the calm to keep it.